that is, when you think about leadership, or you think about what a leader is, or what it is, to be a leader. And I suppose I'm thinking along the lines of leader versus manager. What how would you describe that, just to kind of get us into the flow of things?
I honestly believe everybody wants to shine. And
Mm.
how do you get people in positions to where they can shine? And usually it's through understanding, and it's through your work with those individuals to understand how can I best put them in a position to, one, push themselves, but two, really get to an outcome that delivers confidence and inspires confidence. So I think leadership is an individual thing. There's natural leadership, but I truly believe that it's about your ability to connect with people and to be relatable.
So when you're thinking about your skills, your strengths, the areas that you need to work on and develop, and therefore the team that you want to put around you so that you can all be successful together, what does that look like for you?
In our line of work, in the services and the success space, there's not a lot of hugs. There's not a lot of people that will come back and say thank you for an above and beyond effort. You're usually troubleshooting, you're problem solving,
Mhm.
you're dealing with red conditions in some capacity. So, the people you work with and that trust and that loyalty piece is
Mhm.
super critical to me.
Mhm.
I look for selfless people. I look for people that aren't so over the top into themselves and what they've accomplished that it's a barrier for others to overcome, right? So when I look at talent, I typically push the CV away, and I just try to get into the person and try to understand, what are you all about? Are
Yeah.
you really a selfless team member? Are you really willing to show that vulnerability? Are you really willing to expose areas where I can understand that I can help you and show up well? And I don't fear whatsoever hiring people that are 3,000 points higher on the IQ meter than me. Right? I don't fear that. And that was something that in my early career, it was a sensitivity. When you get around people that are really well educated, really intelligent, and have a lot of horsepower, it can be intimidating. It's like, okay, well, how can I actually add value to this person, right? Or how can I actually talk credibly to this person in their subject matter
Yeah.
and be credible? It's like it can be overwhelming. And what I've realized over the years is that it doesn't matter how much subject matter expertise, it doesn't matter how much intellect they have. At the end of the day, they're just people. I look for constantly progressing individuals in terms of what they're doing to add new skill sets, new capabilities, to where they can generally manage anything. Uh, and,
Mm.
and that's a big part of this for me is do you have the ability for me to drop you into a different functional discipline, a different functional area, and be credible because you have leadership skills and
Yeah.
because you can drive loyalty, right? And because people will work hard for anybody that they trust.
I'm going to put a big line under the word trust, because I have the word trust in my notes, and I'm going to come back to that. I'm curious though, just thinking about talent selection, but actually flipping it. So thinking about it from a candidate's point of view. So if a candidate is looking to come into your organization to fill a role in your organization, how should they be approaching that conversation then?
Being honest and transparent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's um, everybody wants to be treated the same way, right? Is they want transparency, they want to seek to understand, um, and get an honest, an open, and a candid response. And
Yeah.
I think that's how you build trust. I like to let people know exactly how I think, exactly where I stand, to where they can get comfortable understanding. Okay, so how can we work together to drive impact in these areas, or increase output in those areas? I think that trust and that loyalty thing is just huge, and it only
Mhm.
comes through transparent communication. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not easy hearing, okay, you're not showing up well in these areas, but I want to know what that is personally, and so I try to make sure that I share that with others that I engage with.
I guess, what's your barometer for knowing that someone is being genuine?
You can read people pretty quickly as to whether or not they have credibility, and if they're willing to admit to some areas of failure, or some areas where they've not done as good a job versus always glossing. I think that's something that I feel comfortable with. And
Mm.
but you have to have an understanding of what those triggers are and how you get to them to say, okay, am I being told the truth? Because
Mm.
if I'm not being told the truth, then I pretty much will dismiss people, and I have a hard time ever engaging them publicly on a topic. But I will
Mm.
go privately and say, I'm not sure why you just did that, but I know it
Mm.
not to be true, and help me understand why you're so uncomfortable. There's usually a layer below that, like, why is this occurring?
How do you start to think about this is where we're going? This is the talent that we have. There's a bit of a stretch required here. How do you start to think about what the approach for that needs to be?
When I look at the organization, I typically look at skill sets that can help me. I don't
Mm.
look at, well, that person's in that group, or that person's in that region, or that person's untouchable. I don't think that way. I think I look for people that have unique skill sets and unique capabilities that can help me and our teams accelerate to outcomes. And I think if you think that way, then you don't get caught up in a weird transitional position of, I don't have the horsepower to go do this.
Mm.
Um, you do. You just have to figure out how to get it out of the organization, right? And there are plenty of people that can apply specific skill sets to help you solve more problems that have nothing to do with their day job, or what the perception of their day job is.
Mm.
That I think it really opens up your thinking around, how do you move quickest. Sometimes it also introduces complexity, because people don't understand why I wasn't selected, or why didn't you put me on point,
Mm.
or why this is my area of expertise, or sometimes that introduces that dynamic. But it's something that I'm willing to do, because of how I operate myself.
Yeah. And so then how do you deal with the fallout of that?
There's typically conversations
Mm.
around the why, but
Mhm.
again, if you're transparent, if you can have the conversations as to why this individual's skill sets might be more applicable to this. And sometimes it may be a capacity problem, it may be a bandwidth issue, maybe
Mm.
it's someone is looking to go develop in a certain area, and I want to apply this individual into this. Usually, if you explain the rationale and the thought process, people may not necessarily agree, but they can at least see a little bit of the method of the madness as to why certain individuals were afforded certain opportunities, because I just can't help but think that way.
Mm.
It's how I was afforded opportunities because of how I viewed issues and how I viewed problems and problem solving, that ended up continually being pulled into different functional roles.
And so then thinking about those discussions and understanding what surfaced in those discussions, how do you then use that to think about, okay, for certain individuals, what does their development plan need to look like then?
You have to back up the talent reviews with a real plan of attack on how you're going to be attaching individuals to help sure that they have that support ecosystem, to where they can work through those vulnerabilities, and where they have coaching to help them get to the outcome you're looking for. So, I think you have to have a follow-up plan. It's not a That's why I hate typical focal reviews, right? Because I'm just not a fan of focal reviews where you're giving somebody feedback once a year
Mm.
as part of an economic reward. I just
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process, and if
Yeah.
you're open and transparent, you're constantly working through a development thing, so that when you do get to a focal, there's nothing on that focal that you haven't talked about 30 times, right? And I see so many younger managers, that are shocked when they get feedback from their managers, and you're just like, well, why is that a shock?
And do you think that diversity has any part to play in that, in terms of if you're creating a diverse organization, do you need to, flex your approach, change your approach depending on the mix that you have?
And I've always had a very diverse team, always.
Yeah.
And but when I think about diversity, I think more about diversity of thought. Uh,
Mm.
that's really how I kind of look at things, which is, how do people see situations? How do people see paths to an outcome? How do
Mhm.
people engage in conversation and are relatable? How they work and 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 share their thinking in a constructive way
Mhm.
that leads to excellent dialogue.
How do you create an environment where people feel safe enough that it is okay to just bring themselves, bring who they are, show up as they are and be authentic, and for that to be okay, and to not feel like they have to be somebody they're not.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the vulnerability piece.
Mm,
Everybody has certain insecurities, right? And most people understand. Most people have self-awareness to understand what triggers those insecurities,
mm,
and then they also know how they react to them. And again, if I understand what those vulnerabilities are, I can be much more effective, myself and as a manager in helping people, be their best, and to show up in the best way. So
mm. How do you create that environment? Like, how do you create a team that trusts each other?
it comes down to relationships. So you got to be willing to just say, hey, I'm scared here too, right?
Yeah,
I am vulnerable here too. I want to show up just as much as you want to show up well. I want people to think highly of me and my capability. Um, I think that it comes over time, but it also comes over the relationship building that happens sometimes, privately. It's not, you don't get together with a team and say, you will work together,
yeah.
right? But you see that approach a lot of times, which is someone demanding and stating, this is going to be our team DNA. This is going to be how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to contract between each other. This is how we're going to have the rules of engagement play out. This is the way we're going to work together. I just don't see that always materializing in
Mm.
the outcomes, right? It just takes time to develop that chemistry and that trust. And again, the repeatable behavior is what typically gets people comfortable.
Aren't there some things you can do around that though to help maybe accelerate it, so that just to kind of cut down the time that it takes to get there? Or do you think it's just a natural, it will take whatever time it takes?
Um, so no, there's definitely things that you can do to help accelerate the process. The
Mm,
quicker you can bring them together to say, okay, here's the 3-5 year horizontal view. Now let's talk about how we back into that and what your responsibilities are to that, and then how we're going to hold each other accountable for executing against that. That's probably the easiest path that I can see to get
mm,
people engaged and get them locked in and get them bought in. How
mm.
we're moving forward versus, hey, I'm a participant, and this is being dictated, and you don't feel the same buy-in.
Yeah.
And that's again, if everybody's on the same page and around, hey, are we all in on this together and we're
Yeah.
defining this together? Then again, I think that's where some of these red flags might pop up.
Is it actually possible to keep a client happy for the long term?
Where I see a lot of failures in a customer life cycle is when it's event driven,
Mm,
and where you've not established a cadence of communication regardless of the condition of the customer. And people back away from relationships based on what's going on with them versus, I'm staying in this relationship. We're going to have a cadence that's consistent that you can rely on, and we're going to talk openly about where we're at in terms of how we're driving toward outcomes. So I just am a big believer in this communication piece and being consistent. You've got to establish a consistent communication platform for which a customer can rely on, because people come in and out of the picture. But if there's no identified cadence in terms of how we're going to communicate, I typically see things go tilt. So if you have a strong communication strategy, I think you're typically going to be very successful.
yeah, I think the last question I'll put to you, and I'm really just looking for a quick answer on this, but I like to just like close with one of these questions. Um, what would your number one piece of advice be to an emerging leader?
Uh, my number one piece of advice:
Yeah,
um, be authentic.
be authentic. I like that. Okay, we're done, Lambert. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. That I really, I